like Mo said, we really wanted to really take the challenge to the next level and really bring in that coordination that, we were kind of hoping would be there at launch, and then you guys really kind of overran it and kind of, yeah. So,
today we're going to be talking about a topic near and dear to my heart, the idea of world bosses in Guild Wars 2 and why the content seems to have just disappeared. One disappointment for me with Heart of Thorns so far is even in Verdant Brink and even in our examples of the future maps we're getting to, there's still no sign of a truly epic, difficult boss like we had in two specific updates last year. We had Tequatl the Sunless and we had the Triple Trouble Worm. Look at Vinewrath. This potentially could have been a revisit to that type of content and was tuned so low, we really never got the same level of excitement as we once had. What spurred me to talk about this? Well, today, I've got a totally new map to show you guys. One about exactly this.
Looking long term, this is definitely the kind of stuff we'd like to see us do for all of the individual giant world bosses that we have. We want to really kind of push players and challenge them. We want them to enjoy these encounters and have very memorable experience with it. So things like the time limit is something that we're definitely going to be doing in the future. And we're really excited to see how far we can push and see how much of a challenge we can give to you guys. And what you can do with this.
So, who remembers this? This footage you're seeing here is from the 2013 PAX stream. Those new joiners to the franchise. We had Guild Wars 2 released in 2012. In 2013, all they really showed us was the introduction of the LFG tool, ascended weapons were coming into the game, and they showed us Tequatl the Sunless, the revamp. This was, as you just heard, their first attempt to actually make difficult content that required large scales of coordination. And in general, with their original toning of the Tequatl boss, it was fantastic. When this thing released, I remember my home server, Emery Bay, on their first attempt trying to kill the boss, got maybe 5% of its health down. That was it. While some of the bigger servers, Blackgate in particular, were doing much more coordinated efforts to try and down the boss. It was a generally really exciting time. Even after the world first had been claimed, a lot of communities were really knitting their heads together, socializing, meeting one another in TeamSpeak for the first time. A lot of people I speak to now, the first time they ever really heard me was in those original large communication channels set up in TeamSpeaks. And in particular, my experience of this was going in there, learning the fight, failing a whole bunch of times, but then eventually stepping up and helping communicate with new people trying it exactly how it worked, and ultimately co-commanding the first kill on our overflow, which we believe to be the very first time Tequatl was ever killed on an overflow. People at that time believed overflow servers never had the capability of killing these bosses. How could you possibly band enough people together in a TeamSpeak to be able to do this? You needed to be in like one of the main servers. So Arenanet made something great. As you can see in the footage, sometimes they come out with an odd quote that sounds bizarre to us, like, oh, these poison fields are supposed to be dead zones. And in truth, we just stack in the poison fields, tanking them like bosses until eventually they get cleansed away from us. But initially, Tequatl worked really well. Over time, it got nerfed and nerfed, became easier and easier. Power creep obviously became a huge thing, bugs withstanding. Combine those changes with just the raw fact we got better at the game, we've had time to practice the encounter, and now he's kind of trivial. A few months after Tequatl came out, they did the same thing again and introduced the Triple Trouble Worm. Once again, this galvanized the community. It got a lot of people watching PvE streams that had never watched them before, and I ended up, again, co-commanding the first North American kill of that boss. So these have been big things for me. These, I would say, have been some of the best content Arenanet ever produced. Why am I harping on about it? Well, because they never made them after these two, despite being so good. Why? Well, the main reason was illustrated quite well in a video I did a couple of months ago. Consider this is around 3 minutes. Just try it, I'm asking you. Watch 3 minutes of this and see how bored you get. And keep in mind, some people are doing this from 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, even an hour is not unheard of this. This is Guild Wars 2, and it needs to change. Join on Guild Wars 2. So here's the problem. You're designing these massive bosses on a huge scale, and you're putting them in the open world. And that was kind of Arenanet's gimmick. That was their twist for the way they were doing their MMO. It meant that you didn't have to be locked into raid schedules and stupid stuff like that with your guild. You could just be wandering around, luck into one of these encounters, and participate in some really high-end cool content. That was their dream. But it was broken in implementation. See, for most of us, all that stuff I just explained, the excitement of getting the first overflow kill, the Black Gate getting their first quarter kill, and the subsequent ones they made after that, people that would form together, and you know how Emery Bay eventually managed to kill it themselves too, as you know, this close community of friends. These all sound cool, but for the vast majority of Guild Wars 2's population, we weren't doing that. We were trying to get in the damn maps. Guild Wars 2 maps have, on average, a cap of about 150 players. That may sound like a lot, but when the content's just come out and when everyone's clamoring to do it because of achievements, because of the new loot and exclusive rewards that are dropping from these types of content, thousands of people desperate to get into this one map that has been capped with diehard people who, instead of leaving when they finish playing the game, would rather, knowing they'll never be able to get back in the map again because there's such a long queue, they will simply AFK. They'll do stuff like auto running into walls. They'll even run macros that trigger like a random skill every now and then so that the game won't kick them out, and they'll leave. They'll go sleep for the night, they'll come back, and they'll still be in the map. And this causes a massive problem. Obviously, we're heavily incentivized to do it for ourselves, for our own selfish gains, but then this knocks a lot of other people's opportunity to experience the content away. See, Arenanet's idea of random people being able to wander in and see one of these things, even though they have event scaling in the game, doesn't quite work, because to have a random person wandering around, say, Blood Tide Coast, who then happens to see the Triple Trouble Worm, that content then can't really be that difficult. You can't create content then that requires specific roles, like certain people to condition certain foes, as we see with the Triple Trouble Worm, or to be able to block projectiles for long periods of time, again, that we see with the Worm. If you want to have that random open world element, it kind of restricts the kind of content you can do, how hard it can be, and so, over time, we have seen this content be nerfed a little more, nerfed a little more, people get slightly better at it, and now they're just kind of things people do. Triple Trouble, yes, still takes a lot of coordination, hard built into it, but in the end, it's been quite frustrating to get at the truly fun stuff. You're relying on other people bugging out of the map. You want to get in, you're bored, simply clicking join on Guild Wars 2. This is waiting around for fun, just as Arenanet never wanted. This is competing with one another for spots on a map. Again, something that Arenanet never wanted. They wanted you to be able to see other people and always see that as a positive thing. So what's the solution? I've always contended that having a proper map queue system for PvE, like we have for World vs. World, would go a long way. Back when Tequatl came out and maps would get capped, you would try and join on the map, and it would say you were in a proper queue, and it would say, oh, you're waiting, but then when it finally popped up, you would click to join, and you'd find out that the map was full anyway, and it was totally arbitrary, it was broken. They ended up removing that, and now you just get a simple message saying, oh, the world you're trying to join is full, and you are left to basically spam as much as you can until the pop-up reappears. So I think a real map queue system would solve some issues, but then they're still going to be waiting behind possibly hundreds and hundreds of other people, especially if these are large guild run missions, and you might not be able to reserve that spot for yourself.
This is one of those things where you're definitely going to need more than 80 players who are well geared, that are over level 65 for this area, and can really kind of coordinate the challenge that's going to be here.
The other solution, of course, is to not have them in the open world. If you don't have them in the open world, you can make truly exclusive, challenging stuff. You can require that the group of people trying to kill that boss have very specific things. There is no more, oh, this random person wandering around getting a cool experience. It's all segmented away. So you do lose that flavor. Guild Wars 2 becomes much more like a traditional MMO, but maybe there's a good reason that MMOs traditionally put their difficult, exclusive, hard bosses at the end of instances. It may seem lazy to just throw Triple Trouble Worm and Tequatl, as they once were, the difficult versions of them, into instances. They're basically then just raids without the cool stuff that introduces tension stuff beforehand, like the trash and moving through the rooms. It's just the boss at the end. But this will probably still go a long way to making that content accessible for many people. So why didn't Arenanet at least play with the idea of adding these instances? Did they think they were opening a can of worms? Was it not worth it? Well, actually, they did play with it. So, who remembers this? I present you guys Steel Eye Span. This area in-game is pretty boring. It's the location of a single heart event. It's a location of a bunch of siege in the brand, as the brand tends to have a lot of siege, and it's a place that when you're doing map completion, you'll just spend a tiny bit of time in and you'll move on. There is something special about it though. Steel Eye Span is actually situated in Blaze Ridge Steppes. Blaze Ridge Steppes being the first map we were ever really shown, along with Queensdale, for all of Guild Wars 2. It was one of the earliest maps that they ever really worked on and polished, and from early interviews and early demos and showing off of Steel Eye Span and areas like this, you can see they once had much grander plans for these kinds of locations, not just spending a couple of minutes at a heart and then moving on. For the reason alone that it was the very first footage ever leaked of Guild Wars 2, like the actual gameplay footage was some shaky cam of Steel Eye Span, it holds some significance to me, and I've always wanted to see something more be done with it, something more be done with the siege just in general in the brand. But what else is in the brand? Well, the Shatterer. See, it seemed like when they were releasing Tequatl, that we've been talking so much about in this video, they were at some point also going to overhaul the Shatterer. They were going to overhaul the Claw of Jilmag. And at last, you can probably see where I'm going, this brings me to the crux of the video, a Tyria 3D map that has been found of the Shatterer. Alright, so here we go. This is the map. This is very, very exciting to me. I asked you guys a question. I said, why did Arenanet drop it completely? It seems like they didn't drop it completely. Sometime after Triple Trouble Worm, I would suppose, or maybe this is dated, comes from like before the Tequatl, although I doubt it. It seems like sometime after Triple Trouble Worm, they played with the idea of still revamping the world bosses. They saw the quality of this content, but they tried to do it in an instance. What we're looking at here, guys, is a totally new map that we can't actually play on. Now, the map starts on one side. You can see this is kind of the size of it. As you can see here, we have the Shatterer on one side, we'll get to very soon. And on the other side, at the end of this area of this brand, this slice of the brand, we can see Steel Eye Span. So it seems like what they did was they took a cross-section out of Blaze Ridge Steppes. You would have some kind of event or portal or something that would trigger, maybe by guilds out in the open world. This is all just my speculation, that would take you and your group into this instance, this small map, where specifically you would fight your hardcore boss, the Shatterer in this instance. This seems like some early idea they had for overhauling the Shatterer. The map itself, though, isn't like exactly a cross-section of Blaze Ridge Steppes. In fact, yes, we've got Steel Eye Span. This is a very unique landmark. Nothing else like this appears in all of Guild Wars 2. They haven't reused this. Yeah, this is Steel Eye Span. They're kind of the bridges that connect it, it's not the same. A lot of the, the cliffs here, they're not the same. And as we move along the brand itself here, we see we've got a bunch of different fortifications. This is not what the regular map looks like. So I wonder what their solution here was. Again, dare I say that they were going to set this in the mist somehow. Oh, this was going to be a fractal of fighting the Shatterer. I hate to think of that. No, I think this was some kind of large scale. You can bring 50 to 100, maybe 150, as we see with the other events. Amount of people. You start at Steel Eye. Perhaps you start actually over here because there's a walkway. You start here, and it's your job to destroy the boss. And it seemed like it had a lot more mechanics to it than the Shatterer actually does out in the open world. As you guys know right now, Shatterer is, yeah, a cool cinematic fight. But it's really not that interesting mechanically. You just stand at a certain spot and you just blow him up, do a bunch of abilities. It actually really sours the feeling I get when I watch, say, some of those old really exciting trailers, say the Gamescom trailer, where you see this badass boss that supposedly we could drop in all this quality. Like, there's no decent rewards with it necessarily. I mean, there's incentive to do it because it's guaranteed res, but no exclusive rewards, no fear there, no actual sense of joy when you defeat him, and it kind of tarnishes that trailer. So here it looks like they improved the Shatterer. They added a lot more elements to the fight. Now, there's actually a quote, the video that I opened this video up with, of them talking about the Tequatl overhaul. There are a couple of interesting quotes I do want to throw out at you guys.
I think we wanted to keep a lot of the original stuff there because players have fought him before, and so we just wanted to punch up those elements that were already there, and that's the Mega Laser and the Hylic turrets that are around the swamp.
For example, they said, people had already fought Tequatl before they did the revamp. People had already fought Tequatl. And so what they were aiming to do was actually just overhaul what was already there, kind of boost the mechanics that already existed. And so I would expect something very similar here for the Shatterer 2. But at the same time, when they added Tequatl, they also added new mechanics. They added the batteries, and they added, say, the tidal waves, and that kind of stuff. And this, again, I think is what we're seeing here. You know, this appears to be some kind of corrupted fortification. Maybe it was an idea that you'd push from Steel Eye along and you try and like break off all of this crystalline branding stuff off of these fortifications to eventually get to the boss. Maybe he flies around and actually attacks each individual site. This looks like this could have been brilliant. And the map itself is fairly simple. You know, you've got your waterfalls here, you've got a couple of fortifications. I'm not going to speculate too heavily on exactly how the mechanics would work. Around the back here, actually, you've got the Great Northern Wall here, so the positioning's a little bit different as well. Now here you've got a bunch of weird, like, bushes or something that go out in a long runway over here. I don't know whether this is just... this is obviously some artifact which players wouldn't see. Maybe it's got something to do with how the Shatterer flies into the arena. This is what I'm thinking anyway. And then how perhaps he flies away, maybe during phases, or maybe when you eventually manage to kill him. There are a few other things as well I think we can assume about this content. For example, it's funny to me, in the stream they were talking about tech, they kind of mentioned, look, all the mobs around here don't actually drop loot, and that's something that shies many people away from this kind of content, because they like to be able to get loot. They feel unrewarded if they're killing mobs, you know, random trash or ads that are spawned by the boss, and they're not getting anything. And the devs kind of said, you know, we're doing this so that you focus on the boss, not running around trying to tag as much stuff as possible. You know, they got a lot of applause, and we've seen many of the events and things that they're adding to Guild Wars 2. They've stuck with that philosophy, so I think we can expect to see that here too.
But that's probably going to take you to combat for about 60 seconds or so, and it's up to you whether you want to make that run back or to wait around until you get a res from someone else.
Another thing, it was mentioned the idea of you can waypoint away if you like, but you could also maybe wait for a res. Now, everyone knows that's really bad etiquette in the game now. Players generally hate this idea. If you get defeated, you should waypoint away. You stop scaling stuff up. And I doubt that that would have been a mechanic here. I think if you died, maybe you would be forced to waypoint all the way back to Steel Eye Span if it's kind of a generic push-pull, or you're just kind of dead for good. And this is kind of the benefit that they have from actually designing stuff in instances. Scaling, just as a general concept, is always something that felt weird. Some of the early Triple Trouble attempts we'd make would go really well, and it's just because scaling was bugging out, and scaling was being weird. When you instance stuff, when you take it away, design it around a certain number of players, you can eliminate that aspect of the game, and it feels much more rewarding once people are good at something, or much more fair when they're bad at something. However, once all is said and done, unfortunately, this was still dropped. This was still something that we never saw. I presume this is a fairly old map at this point now. This is obviously very work in progress. Didn't have too much development done on it at that time. I wonder why. I wonder whether it's because even when in an instance, they figured it wasn't enough. Maybe they figured that this wasn't what they wanted for world bosses, and if they were ever going to do big instant stuff, that it was going to be much more raid similar. Maybe that's when they put out a posting for a raid designer, which we saw a while ago before Heart of Thorns was announced. And maybe that's why in the expansion we've not been hearing about this kind of stuff, because they are going for a very different idea, perhaps a much more standard traditional approach that we see in most MMOs. And there's other things as well. When you talk about playing with lots of numbers, there's a criticism out there, and one I wholeheartedly agree with. That stuff like Tequatl and the Worm, you know, you hear me saying, oh, it's amazing, but there's some truth to the notion that they're not really that great. They're commanders games. If you're the commander, if you're organizing people, if you're trying to develop the strategies, if you don't know how to succeed at the event yet, if it's not common knowledge, it's the most thrilling, exciting, wonderful thing you can have, especially if you're kind of in a place where you can throw your ideas out there and, you know, you're being vocal about that. That's really fun, but that's a commander's game. And when you get this content gets to a point where people have it on farm, so to speak, when a lot of it's a lot clearer what we should be doing, the actual gameplay you experience may not be too much different to other bosses out there. And, you know, I do agree a little bit with that as well. There are a few other concerns as well. When you've got lots and lots and lots of players, there's the idea of lag. Specifically, when Tequatl came out, there were terrible lag issues. It wasn't just queuing issues. You know, the one reason there was some churn and you had a chance to get in a map was because lag was so bad that people would lag out of the map or get frustrated, and then they would all F4, and then you'd be able to get in on your place on the queue. And that was kind of resolved when they designed Triple Trouble. Triple Trouble split people into lots of different groups, and this did a couple of good things. It helped people like on their raw frames while they were completing the content, but it also allowed them to test the content well as devs too. See, when you're Arenanet and you're trying to design something that lots of people are supposed to kill, outside of just theoretics and maths and looking at previous examples of your game, like saying, okay, we know how much health we gave this boss and what scale everyone was at, so this will probably be good at this scale and this amount of health. Outside of theoretics, actually practicing and testing these large-scale things seems to be very, very difficult for Arenanet to do. That's something that many of you World vs. World players out there will be more than familiar with. So again, this could have been another thing that ended up hamstringing this type of content and putting it on the back burner for us to unfortunately not see again. So yeah, there you go, guys. This was a bit of a discussion on some of my favourite content that has ever been added to Guild Wars 2, what crippled it, what may still be crippling it, what Arenanet once played with behind the scenes and never told us about. Love to hear what you guys think. What can we expect from Heart of Thorns? I was going to do this video a while ago. Remember when I was doing all the videos on difficult content and hardcore stuff, but I got a bit burned out. So here you go. This is like the last hardcore endgamey content video that I wanted to do for that initial week. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, let me know. I'd really appreciate it. And I guess I'll see you next time, guys.
J'ai peur pour la voix.